Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thursday Talks with Chug. Each week, we cover pressing topics that matter to you and your business. My name is Arianna Gonzalez from Chug, attorneys and CPAs tuning in from our San Diego office. Please join me in welcoming partner and attorney Diya Mathews from our Edison, New Jersey office. Hi there, Diya. Welcome.
Hi, Arianna. Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you so much for being here with us. For today's topic, we will be covering consulate visa interview questions. This is a highly requested topic, so I hope you all find it interesting. If you have any questions, please comment them below or email us anytime at info@chug.com. Just quickly before we get started, this conversation is for informational purposes only. It does not create an attorney-client relationship. So again, if you have questions, comment them below or email us anytime at info@chug.com. So let's get right into it, Dia. How should applicants prepare for an IV?
Right. So this is really the final step. And usually most people who go for an immigrant visa appointment have been waiting a long time to get to that moment, right? And so the first thing is obviously follow the instructions. So when the interview is scheduled, usually NBC would send you a detailed email with all the steps that need to be done, instructions for the interview, instructions for what need to be done before the interview, etc. So read that email very carefully. There are a lot of agencies out there, I believe, who will offer help with the interview process and just preparing for the interview, but you don't really need it. Just make sure you review the instructions carefully, and there's a couple of things that need to be done before the interview itself. One is you need to get the the medical test done, and that usually will take a few days. So prioritize that, get the medical appointment done. The second appointment you need to do is schedule the fingerprinting or the biometrics appointment. And usually there's dates available at for both of these, but prioritize these two. And then start preparing for the interview in terms of reviewing the petition that has been filed for you, whether it is a family-based petition or an employment-based petition. Go through the basics, go through the petition. Also, review the DS 260 form that was submitted to the National Visa Center ahead of the interview. So again, a lot of documents have been submitted to both USCIS and National Visa Center, NVC, before the day of the actual interview. So refresh your memory as to what was submitted, go through the papers. If there's any discrepancies or any corrections to be done, make a note of that. Also, understand if there's any weaknesses in your case that need to be addressed. So depending on how material it is, you might need to consult with an attorney, but otherwise it's usually just familiarizing yourself with the application or the petition that was filed for you and being ready.
Great insights. Yes, prepare for the medical exam, biometrics, and then of course make sure your documentation is all available to you. You have it on hand and ready for the interview. So how can applicants ensure that their documents, all of the documents that are needed, are properly organized and complete?
Yeah. Again, so the documents need to be organized and collected before. You can't start doing that the day of the interview, the morning of the interview, obviously. So it starts with the appointment letter, and usually you get that by email from the National Visa Center. And different countries have different processes, right? In some countries you might be able to actually go and schedule your own immigrant visa interview if it's not a very high demand country. On the other hand, if you're talking about a consulate like Mumbai in India, where there's huge volume, they have a very strict process. So you get the interview notice with the date and time. You have to be ready and show up on the day of. If there is a specific reason for rescheduling, requesting a reschedule, then that's a different process. And I would not recommend it unless it's really, really important to reschedule. So going back to the appointment confirmation letter, read the instructions in it. The main documentation that you have to be mindful of is the passport, obviously, the original passport, because they're going to put the immigrant visa stamp in the passport, and you need to present a passport that is good for at least 6 months beyond the date of intended entry into the US. So go with the updated passport as if needed. The next big thing is the civil documents. So the civil documents are, your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, police clearance certificates, any criminal records, if applicable. Now, most of these documents would have been submitted to the National Visa Center already. They have already been uploaded into the CAC portal, and it's only after NVC has reviewed everything and the cases, as they call, documentally qualified. The interviews are going to be scheduled only after all of these steps have been completed. But all the documents submitted to immigration at this point are photocopies or scanned copies. So when you go for the immigrant visa interview, the officer wants to see the originals of all of these documents. So make sure you go with the originals of each of these. And if you don't have the original for any reason, then you have to be prepared to give an explanation. So the civil documents would be the next important thing after the passport. Also review the affidavit of support. So the affidavit of support is very important in family-based cases. If it's a spouse or a sibling petition, then the sponsor, the U.S. citizen sponsor, has to give the affidavit of support, basically confirming that they will make sure that the person, the applicant, immigrant, doesn't end up being a public charge in the U.S. So again, the affidavit of support and the supporting documents have already been provided to National Visa Center. However, it is a good idea to take updated documents. So the sponsor's W-2 and tax returns, if you can, especially if it's been it's been a significant gap between the submission of the documents and the time of the interview, then the sponsor might have another set of documents due, right? Tax return and the W-2. So it's good to ask for and take those updated documents with you for the interview. If it's an employment-based immigrant visa appointment, then ask for an updated employment offer letter from the petitioner in the US. And then, the other documents we discussed, which was the medical examination report. So hopefully on the day of the interview, you're going with the medical exam report, which will be provided to you in a sealed envelope by the physician. And so take that with you. If for any reason you have not been able to get the medical examination report, then you should still go for the interview, but explain to the officer that you're waiting on the report, and they'll probably put the case on hold until you submit the examination report. Another important thing to keep in mind is that the medical exam should only be done by a panel physician. You can't just go to any physician. It has to be a physician who is approved for this purpose by the Department of State. So you can find a list of those physicians, and you should go to them for this. So that's really all in terms of the documentation. And if there's any other documents that are relevant to your case, I would take those. Oh yeah, just a note here for spousal cases, when there's an immediate relative spousal case or an F2A spouse case, it's always a good idea to take additional proof of the relationship. So whether it is photographs of you together with friends and family, or any other additional evidence of the relationship that you have, take that with you. You might not need to present all of it, but always go prepared with all of these documents, and make sure that these documents are also organized, and maybe put them in a folder with proper tabs so that you can take them out quickly if the officer asks for it. So back to you.
Really great insights there, Diya. Such important points. Thank you for going into such detail for us on that as well. So one of the questions that we get quite often from clients that we're helping through this process is, what questions should they expect to be asked? What are the most common questions that are asked during an immigrant visa interview? Do we have information on what those questions might be?
Yeah. So that's what people always want, right? And oftentimes they'll ask, can you do a mock interview with me before I go? So the first thing I tell people is, the officer is not going to ask you. Usually, they will not ask you for information that you don't have. Anything that they ask you is probably going to be factual, And it is, they're not going to ask you any legal questions, or, there's probably not going to be, trick questions. So it'll mostly be, so for example, if it's a family case, right? Let's say it's an F4 sibling case. It's your brother or sister, a US citizen in the US, who's filed a petition for you. And that might have been 15, 16 years ago that the petition was filed, and you now have the interview. So what are the questions you can expect? They would ask you, who is a petitioner? So, that's easy enough. It's your sibling, brother or sister. Where do they live in the United States? What kind of work do they do? Where do you live? About the applicant itself. Where do you live? What kind of work have you been doing? Did you live in any other countries? Now, all of this information is already there in the documents which have been submitted to immigration so far. So as part of the NVC process, you would have filled out a very detailed DS 260 form, which asks for, your life history, like your residential details, your employment details, details of your parents, all of that. But this is their way of validating that information. And remember, this is the only opportunity that the US immigration system has to actually interview the applicant, right? Everything else is being done on paper. So this is really just them confirming that all of this information which has been submitted in the application is accurate. So these are the questions you can expect. If it's a spousal case, they might ask you. So if it's if your husband or wife applying for the foreign spouse, then you can expect questions around the relationship. When did you meet? How long have you been married? What does your husband or wife do in the US? They might ask you how much money they make, which hospital, or which workplace they work at. And then, again, it could be questions about you. So the same questions about your history. Are there any, is there any criminal history, and things like that. So again, the point is it's all going to be factual questions you can easily answer. If for some reason you don't remember or you're flustered, it's just best to take a deep breath and tell them you don't remember, or, you don't recollect, instead of, trying to guess something. Or if you don't understand the officer, the exact question that was asked, you can ask them to repeat it, so you didn't understand. So there's no rush, and I would keep the answers direct and to the point. Don't try to make too much conversation there, or, provide additional information beyond what is, really needed. If it's an employment-based case, and we see more of those now, because especially with retrogression for many countries, the employer might have started the immigration process for the applicant a while ago, and then before that priority date became current, maybe their work visa ran out and they had to move back to their home country. So if it's a situation like that, for employment-based cases, make sure you have information about the employer, where the employer is located, what kind of work they do, how many employees they have, just common sense questions, information about the petitioner employer, also about the job that is being offered to you. So you should have some clarity about the position itself, the offered wage, where the position is going to be based out of. And they might also ask you questions about how you how did this employment offer to you come about, right? Did you ever work for the employer in the past? And if so, how did you get that job? How did you apply for that job? So again, these are all questions that most applicants would be able to answer. There could be questions about previous periods of stay in the US, whether it is temporary or on a work visa. Be prepared to address those. We've also seen some interesting questions about medical issues. So if you have, for example, a medical condition, like let's say you need dialysis, they might ask you, how are you going to manage that condition in the US? Will you have insurance and things like that? So those are typically the questions we see in these contexts.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful. So what about questions about immigration history? How should applicants respond to these types of questions?
Yeah. So, again, immigration history, if it's, straightforward, if they spend time in the US on a work visa, whatever, be prepared with the dates and, locations. And if you were employed, then be prepared to talk about that. If there was any overstay, it is very important to be prepared with an explanation about overstays, or, especially if you've had a waiver filed for you before the immigrant visa interview was scheduled, be prepared to talk about that as well. And you have to be confident, right? You have to be respectful and confident. And again, going back to what I said, if you don't understand a question, or if you don't know the answer, it's just good to be forthright than make up something.
I also love that you said we can ask for clarity on any questions as well. I think that's helpful to know and a good reminder for a lot of people as well. So what about questions? Are there any specific questions applicants should be prepared to answer regarding their sponsor or employment? Does this usually come up?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can expect questions about the sponsor, or about the employment. And again, it's not because they don't have the information with them already. It's just making sure that this is, to check the bona fides of the petition and the relationship, right? So if it's a family-based case, they could ask you about your relationship with the sponsor, whether it is a spouse, or a parent or sibling. Those would be the questions to expect. And if it's an employment-based case, then you can expect questions about, the details of the job offer. And they might also ask you, like, have you paid any money for this petition? Did the employer make you sign anything? They might also give you some sort of general, advice on if there is, if there's any abuse in the employment relationship, you can report it and things like that. That's what I would expect in a family or an employment based case. If you have an investment based case, let's say an EB-5, although those are not as many as the other categories, but if you have an EB-5 investor case, then expect questions about the project and where it is at, and how did you invest in it, and how did you find the project, and things like that.
So what about red flags? What are some red flags that consular officers look for during the interview process?
Yeah. The interview itself would be fairly short, right? It's not going to be very long usually. Most cases, people are surprised that the interview is short. Of course, if you have some complicated immigration history, then the interview can take longer, but most interviews would not be more than 15 minutes. So, answer the question truthfully and try to be concise. And again, if you don't know the answer, better to admit it than to, try guess. Try to maintain eye contact with the officer, and be respectful in your responses, obviously. They look out for things like that. And the officer's decision, we say this to our clients, oftentimes it's, they make an assessment based on your body language and your demeanor, more than what, exactly you might say. They're looking at, are you comfortable? Are you familiar? Are you, does it seem like you're being truthful with the information? So, keep the answers direct and to the point.
Yeah, that's a great point there. I'm sure a lot of people might be really nervous during this process and, kind of give off that energy. So do you have any tips or advice for applicants who might feel nervous or overwhelmed during the interview?
Yeah. So, keep in mind that the application is already approved, right? So, this is, as I said at the beginning, this is really the final step in the process. So a lot has happened already. The petition that was filed for you by the sponsor has been vetted and has been approved. And you've now given additional information to National Visa Center that has also been vetted, and the interview is being scheduled only after they reviewed all of that and made sure that that was satisfactory, right? So again, going back to my mantra, it's, they're only going to ask you factual questions, and think of it as a validation of everything that has already been submitted already. Now, if you feel that there is some discrepancy or there's some gap in the information that you submitted, right? And that's, like you feel maybe you got the employment dates wrong, or maybe, your dates of residence were wrong. Then the question is that material information, right? So sometimes, the information that you left out, or, you made a mistake in the dates, etc., that might not be material. And so, it should be fine to point out to the office at that time that, hey, this was meant to be like this, etc., and they can, fix that in the record. But if there is something that is material, then it's probably better to consult with an attorney, and then go in for the interview, and then the attorney can advise you on how to handle that.
Absolutely. Great points there. Another question we get quite often is what should I wear? So, what attire or presentation style would you recommend for this interview?
So there's no set code. You have to be respectful, and the visa officer, the interviewing officer, wants to see that you take this process seriously, right? So you don't have to be, super formal. You wear something that you're comfortable in. Usually, business casual is appropriate. I would not wear jeans, but you go in something that you're comfortable in.
Great. So, what should applicants expect in terms of security checks or procedures upon arriving at the consulate? Do we have any information on this?
Yeah. So that's a good question, and it varies. In some consulates, there's heavy security procedures, and that's because of, the consulate itself. Maybe it's in a country which, is, has experienced security threats in the past, or maybe they have a huge volume of applicants. So depending on the consulate, you might, experience enhanced security measures, like you'd have to probably go through multiple rooms, and have to be searched a couple of times. They'll go through all your documents. You cannot really bring in anything that is not absolutely required for the interview. They might even ask you to leave your mobile phones and things outside, like, most of the consulates in India. They ask you to leave them at the door. So depending on the consulate, there might be a number of security procedures to be completed before. And so it's always good to go a few minutes in advance of the interview, like at least 15 minutes in advance. They also don't want you to be there too early, right? So, even if you're, very much looking forward to the interview, I would not go more than half an hour in advance of the interview. Again, as I said, don't take anything that you don't absolutely need for the interview. The documents, yes, and the documents have to be, you have to find out a way of carrying them in an organized way so that you can pull them, take out the required documents as needed, if the officer asks for it.
Great advice and on being prepared and that as well. So you did mention that usually interviews are a lot quicker than people expect. So how long do these visa interviews usually last? And what factors might affect the duration of this?
Yeah, the majority of interviews, I don't think take more than 15 minutes, 15 to 20
Wow.
minutes, if at all. It could even be shorter. Again, if there's, some, if there's a particular issue that the officer is concerned about, or they want to probe more, then it could take longer.
So what are the next steps if the consulate requests more information after the interview?
Yeah, so the officer will tell you then, and they'll probably hand you a sheet of paper, a notice with the documents that they need. And that'll give you a sense of what it is that they're looking for, right? It could be something as simple as maybe, the medical report. Maybe, at the time that you went in, you didn't have the medical report. So it could be something like that. And that's easy enough to provide. Or maybe they want some civil document. You don't have the original for the civil document. Now, if it's something more, for example, if it's a family, if it's a spousal case and they are not convinced that this is really a good faith marriage, then they might ask for more proof of the, the marriage itself, the relationship. And so in those cases, you would have an opportunity to supplement the information which is already on the file. And then you should try to provide that information as soon as possible, because if you take very long, then they tend to view that as they're a little skeptical if you take too long to submit the pending information or documents. So try to prioritize that and get it to them as soon as possible.
Wow, great points there. Yes, if they do request more information, make sure to get that to them as soon as you can. So, okay, so the applicant has had the interview. What happens after? How will they be notified of their visa decision?
Yeah, so the officer, if it's going to be approved and it's a straightforward case, the officer would normally tell you there that the visas are going to be issued, and you can leave your passport there, and then they let you know when to pick it up. So depending on what you chose, whether you want to go and pick it up from the consulate or you want to have it mailed to you, those preferences, you can let them know. And so typically the officer is able to make a decision immediately. But if it's a young officer, a trainee, for example, and they need to check with their supervisor on something, then they might not tell you immediately. But if they tell you to leave the passport there, it's usually a good sign.
Wow, okay, that's really good to know that you'll usually get to know right away. So what happens if an applicant's visa is denied? What should they do?
Yeah. So depending on the reason for the denial, right? And so, the denial notice, they will usually give you an idea of why the cases is being denied. So you can review that and work with an attorney. Some of the common reasons for denial, if it's a spousal case, maybe they're not convinced about the relationship, that happens. Then there's, CSPA issues. If they think that maybe a derivative beneficiary, a child or a person under 21 or over 21 doesn't qualify for CSPA, Child Status Protection Act benefits. And then, you can work with an attorney to see if an appeal is recommended. Depending on what the reason for the denial is, you might be able to overcome it, but you have to probably get professional advice for that.
Absolutely. So how long should applicants expect to wait for their visa after the interview?
The consulates are pretty good with that. In most cases, you can expect to have the passports back within a week, maybe even less. So it's unusual for them to take more than a week with the passports.
Wow, okay, good to know that. That sounds like it goes pretty quickly then. So one more question for you. I know we're short on time. Can you explain how medical exams factor into the immigrant visa process and what to bring to the interview?
Yeah. So the medical exam is a statutory requirement. So everybody who is admitted to the US as a lawful permanent resident has to, do the medical exam to show that they don't have any major illnesses, etc. So that's routinely done before the interview. And as I said, you take the sealed envelope with you to the interview, and only the officer should be opening it. If you don't get the medical exam in time, then go for the interview nonetheless, and then try to provide the medical exam report later on. In some cases, especially for applicants from India, they might test positive for TB, for tuberculosis, when they do the medical exam. And if that happens and they have to go through an additional screening, to show that they are not contagious, or, they don't really carry the TB virus. So then that takes more time, and then there's a separate process for that, because usually the interview will have to be rescheduled, or can only be scheduled after the entire TB screening process is completed. But otherwise, it's just a matter of going to the panel physician, getting the test done, and going to the interview.
Wow, really good to know. Such great insights, Dia. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer all of my questions on this process and sharing all of your valuable insights with us. That is all we have time for today, so this brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you everyone for joining us today. A special thank you to Dia for taking the time to answer our questions. To stay up to date, please subscribe and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If you have any questions, email us anytime at info@chook.com. Let us know what topic you want to see next. And make sure to join us back here next week for more pressing topics that truly matter to you and your business. Until next time, stay safe and take care. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you so much, Dia.